Hello, welcome everybody to this panel session, panel number 3 on involving patients.
Sorry, Peggy, we haven't gone live quite yet. We've started recording, but we've still got 20 seconds.
Okay.
So hang on, we're on 10 seconds.
Yeah,
now. Hang on. Yeah. Count down from 5 seconds.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this session, panel session number 3 on involving patients and health technology assessments in low and middle income countries, making the ends meet. My name is Anke Peggy Holdorf. I'm co-chairing the session with Johnny Müller. And with us here is our panel consisting of Sarah Garner from the WHO, Sean Nagel from Novartis, Clarice Portugal from Conitec in Brazil, and Kaval Debsemi from the International Alliance of Patient Organizations. We have decided that today we will not do any big presentations, but spend all the time we have discussing between us about this exciting issue. And I would like to encourage the audience to post your questions, your comments while we go through that. Also, we've prepared some questions, or we've prepared slides with the same questions we are discussing to the audience through the Slido system, and you will find the link to that system and the entry code for it on the slides, where you can vote or give your vote to the question. As you've all heard in the beginning, this session will be recorded, and so it can be replayed at any later time or recommended to others if you really like it. With that, I don't spend any further time on explanations, and I would like to enter the discussion with my first question. Although one more thing I would like to say, that this session is coming out of a project from the which is a collaboration of the Patient and Citizen Involvement Interest Group and the Developing Countries Interest Group. And the project is exactly on that: patient and citizen involvement in low and middle income countries. So with that, I would like to jump to my first questions. And now you see on the slide that there is a link. You also could scan the QR code, and you have the code number of the voting here. And the question is, why should patient and public involvement, or patient and citizen involvement, be done for HTA or healthcare policy evaluations in low and middle income countries? And while we are discussing, you have time to give your own responses, and this will hopefully end up in a word cloud. But to give you time to do so, I'd like to direct this question first to our representative of the patient community here, Kaval. Please go ahead. And please, before you answer to the question, please give a very short introduction to yourself, each of you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. I'm Kaval Debsemi. I'm the CEO of the International Alliance of Patients Organizations. Currently, I'm flying the flag of the African Medicines Agency Treaty Alliance, another we have formed shortly to be launched next week, with a view of engaging patients in regulatory affairs. hopefully we can do an AMATA or AMTA as well later on. My interest has always been that the patient must come first, and that nothing about us without us. Therefore, every aspect of the health system should be open to us, and that not only means how to set up patient safety measures or to service models or to discuss things or care arrangements, etc., but also the health economics element of it. It's very important for us patients to be there in this particular setting, in the HTA setting. We know health is a political choice, and politics is a continuous choice amongst competing interests. Now, if we are not in that choice, then we have lost our advantage in this competing interest. Others will. And this competing interest is becoming more acute post-pandemic, as you know. Education, transport, industry, travel, all will be coming back to the state and saying, we want the money now. Please divert from help to us. So we don't want that to happen. And lastly, I think patients should be there because as not only as taxpayers, as service users, we need to get the best there is possible in the fairest, because patients are worried about equity, is that the fairest possible means that serves our interests and keeps us healthy, cures us of disease, and even prolongs our lives without suffering. So that's why you should be there at the heart of this decision making. Nothing about us without us, even if it happens to be health economics or other decisions. Thank you. Anki, I think we've got a mute somewhere.
You're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm back. Thank you, Kavali, for this contribution. Nothing about us without us, and that in all, not only major healthcare systems, in all healthcare systems around the world. May I give the word next to Sarah from the WHO to comment on why should this be done?
Thank you very much, Anka. My name is Sarah Garner. I'm the Acting Regional Advisor for the Access to Medicines and Healthcare Programme at WHO Euro. And I'm going to agree wholeheartedly with Kandildeep. This healthcare systems are there to provide healthcare for patients. That is endpoint of the goal. So how can you make decisions about what is being provided without involving patients and civil society and citizens in those decisions? So for me, it's a no-brainer. And just on a technical level as well, we know very much about the results of randomized controlled trials and their limitations, but that is very different from what happens when someone's actually taking a medicine, the results they see, how they take that medicine, and this efficacy, effectiveness difference is vitally important to understand. Not only from the patient's benefits, but also for the healthcare system as well, to understand what's working or not working. And I'll pass back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd suggest we do the round here on this question, because it is really important to hear the thoughts from the different perspectives. Sean, may I ask you next?
Sure. I mean, I guess I also want to piggyback on the things that were said by my peer panelists. I think it is critical, I think, for the legitimacy of any HTA or healthcare policy evaluation to consider the perspectives of all of the stakeholders involved. And I think there's probably different times and places during the process where the participation becomes more impactful on the result, but ultimately, asking a directly affected stakeholder, if you need disease-specific expertise, it would be erroneous just to look to a medical expert, where I think the patient, for example, could explain the burden of disease and how he or she experiences the treatment that affects, the treatment effects of a new therapy in his or her daily life is the type of, critical information that really creates a much more holistic understanding about the HTA process. So I think it's for me, also a bit of a no-brainer to be as comprehensive to include these perspectives, but it is important to think about the when and the why and the how. I think we'll come to some of those questions later, but I do concur with my fellow panelists about the, what should be done. I think we should be thinking more inclusively and actually think about not just the end uses of the healthcare system, but how that disease is impacting a patient and a caregiver in a specific LMIC. We have to think about ways to incorporate this into the process to make it much more fair, transparent, and legitimate.
Thank you very much. And Clarice, from the Brazilian perspective.
Hello, everyone. I
am
am Clarice Portugal, and I work at the National Committee for Health Technology Incorporation, CONITEC, in Brazilian public health system. CONITEC advises the Ministry of Health in decisions related to incorporation, exclusion, or changing medicines, products, procedures in our health system. And it's also responsible for advising the Ministry on the development of clinical guidelines. And well, I act directly in actions concerned with public and patient involvement in the HTA process here in CONITEC. Our team is linked to the Department of Management of Technology Incorporation and Innovation in Health, which acts as CONITEC's executive secretariat. So thank you, first of all, for this opportunity. Well, I think that patient and public involvement has a fundamental importance in all cultures. However, it takes on particular nuances in the context of LMICs. It's worth remembering that often these countries deal with a smaller amount of resource. So in such context, HTA has an important role in defining which technologies will be offered to the population. In addition, social and health inequities can also be noticed in this context, realizing that different social segments have specific health needs, and this specificity must be taken into account in decision-making process. So I think it's important to reinforce the possibility of representation, inclusiveness, as Sean said, and effective listening and acceptance of the demands of different groups, so that their contributions can actually be recognized and support public health policies. I think that's my contribution.
Thank you very much. Gianni, do we have any comments or questions from the audience already?
No, not yet. Not yet. And please don't forget to put in your poll.
Exactly. So if you have questions, just put them through the live Q&A element in the software, in the conference software. And also, there's a discussion forum which can be used for contributing your comments. I see that many people have, or several people have already entered their responses to these questions, their short responses, and I see that fairness and experience, I guess that relates to the experience of the patients with the disease states. I see some more words which also came up through the contributions of the panelists, like inclusiveness, healthcare for patients, legitimacy, then reality check. I think that's very important, and that's also what Clarice just pointed out, is like we need to make sure that we meet the needs of the specific patients segments. So that summarizes it, I think, quite nicely here. Any comments from the panel?
I think the
If
experience
not, I would. Yeah, go ahead.
Experience is the most important gain in that we come to the panel not as casual observers or just participants to have tea and biscuits. We bring with us something a valuable resource that the finance system needs, and that's experience. By having navigated most of those pathways, we can clearly see what works, what doesn't, and by having our eyes and ears open, we know where the efficiencies are, where the bottlenecks are sometimes in the systems. And also major, I think, is sometimes you can see how to redefine that technology. And so, I mean, it prevents total failure, meaning that some technology that appears to fail, but with our intervention, we can really make it successful in the future. So that experience has got pounds and dollars against it, because that you can't buy anywhere.
Yeah, from that, what I hear with this comment is that you say don't only involve us in assessing the technology, but also involve us in making it or giving it the best place in the therapy and making it a successful technology together, right? Thank you. I think that is an important point. This is not a one-time, it shouldn't be a one-time interaction. It should be really like a different way of collaborating to make healthcare work best. So let's move forward one step to our next question, which for the audience is a choice of things you have there. And I'm reading out the questions. Where are the special challenges in low and middle income countries for patient involvement in HTA, or where there is no HTA in healthcare related decision making? And maybe here I ask Clarice first with her practical experience from the HTA side.
Well, here in Conitec, of course, have several challenges facing patient and citizen involvement in HTA. In the case specific of Brazil, the possibilities of involvement in the process carried out by Conitec are made available mainly through the internet, which goes against the problem of the digital exclusion. That is still a huge problem in Brazil, although this reality has significantly improved in the last decade. In addition, the same form of access makes it difficult for people with little literacy to engage, as they are required to fill in forms and send a series of typed content. And that's difficult for a huge portion of our population. We also realize that involvement in HTA is still very restricted to patient associations, even though the participation of other collectives and social movements as Black movement, LGBT, feminists, rural workers, homeless population is very important and even strategic, you know, specifically in specific agendas that address certain forms of social inequities. For example, neglected diseases, sickle cell anemia, which affects mostly the Black population, and mental disorders. In other words, I think the issue that seems to permeate the PPI in the HTA in a more challenging way seems to be the consolidation of a situation that fosters epistemically fairer relationships, you know? That is, those relationships in which stakeholders can position themselves as subjects of knowledge and learn with each other and share their perspectives as horizontally as possible. I think that's our biggest challenge here in our context.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Cavalli, would you like to expand on that or respond to that from your perspective?
Yes, most definitely. I think because HTA, in essence, it distinguishes itself from every other health economic decision making because it's got to be done at a societal level. It is about the whole of society and whole of government working together. And I'm glad that Clarice has brought the other interest groups in this because it's very important to bring that equity element into it. You know, sometimes the voice of the middle class patient, the male middle class patient, sometimes overranks other groups. So we do need to bring those voices into it. And I think as a way of consideration as well, because it's a whole of society intervention, I'm surprised, for instance, if there's a major railway, like for instance in the UK, we had that Northern Railway thing, you find whole of society was engaged with it. And yet gene therapy, which is the most transformative thing that we are facing, only a handful of people were participating in. Society was not valuing healthcare participation to that level as, say, environmental participation and that sort of thing. We need to break that out, that society has got a legitimate role to play in health technology. And hopefully this shock we got from COVID will remind them that if you ignore health, you pay a very heavy price. So I think now is the time the iron is hot. We should drive this home that it's about your business. It's not about patients alone. It's about other business. And I think patients do require those publics and the patrons that can really push these things, the political elite. So I agree with Clarissa wholeheartedly.
Thank you very much. So in addition to what Clary said, what I hear, it's not only the politics and the HTA agencies who need to do something, it's also the patients to be engaged and be willed to be part of the system, right? Maybe from the industry side, Sean, what is your experience here with the challenges?
Sure. Actually, I forgot to introduce myself last time. I'm Sean Nagel. I'm the head of patient access for Latin America and Canada for Novartis. And yeah, I mean, just to add on to maybe another challenge, and I don't know if it's actually specific for LMICs, because I think even in non-LMICs, we see the same issue is that the stakeholder engagement from the public and patient. I guess there's a perception that at certain points in the HTA that this input could actually erode the scientific rigor, or perhaps it should not be emotionally influential on the decision. So I think really how that we get the perspective of caregivers, of society at large, and specifically the patient, to be done in an objective way. For example, maybe it's done in the early dialogue before the scoping, just so you can hear from the patient, for example, in terms of how they're impacted by the disease, to be able to understand what the endpoints mean that are going into the more scientific and rigorous part of the HTA analyses, and try to detach it when the actual decision is made, is to seem not being influential just by the testimony of one patient is it's a bit of a conundrum, right? So I think most people agree that more involvement is better, but I think it's most important that the HTA methods are well understood, and where the contribution of the public and the patient is most influential come at different stages in the HTA. But this should not be an excuse not to look for those kind of inputs, because they are so critical to have really a well-informed HTA decision. But I would say it challenges the perception that the testimony given by patients, patient groups, and society might be a little bit emotionally influential on the decision. So I think that's just something to keep in mind as new HTAs are being developed and remodeled, that I think that there has to be a time and a place to make sure it's adding value and not being seen as kind of overly influential on the decision based on emotional content in a scientific process.
Mm-hmm. So a lot around the perceptions of what the valuable contribution could be, and that we increase awareness on that subject. So Sarah, I increased the level of difficulty for you. There was meanwhile a question coming, which was whether we could quickly explain on how HTA is done in low and middle income countries. And I'm happy to back up on that, but since you are coming from this larger organization, maybe you can try to build that a little bit within into your answer.
Okay, great. No challenge, it's a big challenge there. So for me, I think from what I've seen, both at a global level and in the European region, one of the major challenges is cultural. That citizens have very little say in what happens in policy terms in their country. generally. With low middle income countries, you often have a very unstable political solution as well. So what tends to happen is we have rapid turnover at the top and then the heads of agencies. So any progress that you make can be very rapidly back to the starting point again, and you have to start again with another administration. Nonetheless, we've seen some very good examples where they've been able to make this happen. And some of the, certainly in the EU, some of the European Union patient organisations are also providing support to the Eastern Europe and Central Asian countries, and they have members in those countries. So there are starting blocks, there's some good practice, but I think that the main thing as well is not to underestimate how much courage it might take for a patient or a citizen or a patient organisation to actually speak out and ask for treatments and start making those, they're seen as demands on the system. So that for me is the biggest challenge of all, is this cultural challenge.
Gianni, can I call you into the discussion to kind of back up on this question of HTA in low and middle income countries?
Yeah, thank you, Anke. Yeah, it's you know, as Sarah mentioned, it's different, and because of so many, there are other criteria like the political situation, like culture, acceptance, and so on, right? So it's all over the place. It's at different levels. In some countries, we do not even have HTA. And there are others which are much more ahead in their HTA implementation. And so on top of that, so including patient in their HTA studies is not taking place, and it's coming by and by, so we have to keep that in mind also when we want to involve patient. Saying that, Anke, you know, from our project on this and the paper that we published on involving patients in HTA or decision-making process, we are also learning that a patient can be and public can be involved in various ways in the decision-making process. And that is something that HTA or we from HTA can build up on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Since Gianni just mentioned the paper we published, maybe while we go on, Gianni, you could put the reference in the chat. So that is work we've done in this patient and citizen involvement in low and middle income countries group, is that we started to develop our analytical framework, like a template to apply to different countries and areas, to understand like what level of HTA is done in this country, and then what level of patient involvement is possible in these countries, in which specific processes of HTA, and we are hoping, we started to do that in 4 countries across the world, which is very diverse countries: Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, and Indonesia. And we would like to expand this across other countries. So any of the audience, if you're interested in helping with that in your respective countries, we would be more than interested in getting more input here. So let's look at the responses we got here from the audience. So number 1 is the lack, I guess, of political will for patient and citizen involvement in the low and middle income countries. And then there is the decision-making process, which doesn't allow for this involvement or this level of involvement. Legal frameworks and And then lack of patient organizations or advocacy, and I guess we'll come back to that point later through the discussions we heard before, I think from Clarice, that the subject would be neglected diseases or some disease areas, and I think that's especially where there is this big lack of patient advocacy seen. Competence, time and resources, and the other things. Let's and Sarah, I think, mentioned before that there are actually good examples coming up for patient and citizen involvement in low and middle income countries. So maybe we can talk a little bit about these examples among the panel, but also I would like to ask the audience, if you're aware of examples, just put them into the software here and let us collect some of these examples. Sarah, would you like to expand on that?
Sure, yes, no problem. I've met two great examples on my travels with WHO. The first one, I would say, was Ukraine, where they have it's now established HTA agency who's actually making decisions that then lead into the benefit packages, which is great. And there is an emergent patient advocacy for access to different sorts of medicines. It doesn't tend to be the medicines that we see in the high-income countries. Quite a lot of the time there's problems around access to basic medicines. They have a very small universal healthcare coverage program. But I've met some of the Ukrainian patient advocates and they're doing a fantastic job. The other one is Malawi. Again, I met an excellent lady who I believe probably does work on the international stage. And she set up a system and it was more about listening to individuals and then empowering them. So maybe a different form of patient engagement than we typically think about HTA, but making sure that the patients were informed about their rights and how to go about advocacy, perhaps at an individual provider level. So I think those are two examples where I've seen some great bottom-up progress. I'll pass back to you.
Thank you very much. I especially like the notion of listening. I think this is so important in this whole field. Other examples from the panel, just jump in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we got to note that in low and middle income countries is that practices that can be accredited to HTA are being are undertaken at various levels in the ministries. You know, you'll find that a cost-benefit analysis being done somewhere else, but they're like disparate players taking these analyses, and even sometimes the patient organization is sometimes asked in to say what would they prefer in one or two, but that's not as unified or rigorously attached to current evidence base. So they do take these decisions, and I've got friends who tender for a lot of health products, medicines in Africa, and we've looked at some of the tender specifications, and you find that some do look as if they've had some kind of HTA taken into its consideration, and those specification writers are the ones I think we need to engage later on, maybe in the process. So far, they still go on the lowest competitive tender cost, you know, rather than the broader vision. But it's there. It's there. And I think the lowest rung that we can get on all is improve that specification. You know, let's start with those little bits. But it's there. Counterexamples, I think, with international development is Taiwan, China is trying to promote its model within Asia Pacific area, and the model that's produced by the Prince Maidul University in Thailand. Thailand is really helping Cambodia, Laos in the area, and Indonesia as well, to adopt some of its approaches and take some of its central analytical powerhouses and its university and its sources and software and hardware into consideration. So it's there, but it's not ribboned and labeled as that. So that it's there, but it's got to be somewhat brought together into one umbrella. Yeah.
Thank you, Khalid. I agree with you. It's you see here and there opportunities for this, or that it is done, but not necessarily in a consistent manner. I do like your example with the tenders, and I've over the last few years done a lot of work with low and middle income countries to exactly support these processes by using something like a multi-criteria decision system, where they have like the key factors which are important in purchasing, and to get away from this lowest price to make sure that there is the certain level of quality is guaranteed and safety for the patients, but also some potential additional aspects which are of special of importance to the patients. But it's a slow process. Any examples in addition from the others? I mean, we've seen in Brazil through our analysis, through what Clarice reported, that there is at least the attempt to create something like a more consistent way of integrating citizens also into the processes for HTA.
Well, I was about to mention it. I'm very happy to see the double mentioning. Well, I'm very happy to see it. Well, here in Conitec, we have been investing in the improvement of the patient's involvement engagement a lot. And since December of the last year, Conitec counts with the testimony of patients and carers during the meeting, where the HTA demand is primarily approached by the plenary members, So this meeting precedes the public consultation, which is an important space for PPI, of course, and it has been conducted at Conitec since its beginning in 2012. Well, the representatives have autonomy to elaborate their speech, albeit they have access to technical support. We have a specific team in Conitec to guarantee this, in order to facilitate the exposition of their arguments and enable the strategic use of the time available for the speech. That's only 10 minutes. And these actors are anchored into the meeting when the topic starts to be discussed. So the representative can watch the live of the presentation of the technical report. And with this space of speech, we aim to expand the patient involvement in prior phases of HTA process and give to the plenary the opportunity of addressing aspects related to the experience with the health condition and/or with the technology. Hence, it becomes possible to understand and to get close to the expectations and demands of the users, articulating them to the benefits that the technology can effectively offer. So it's particularly important to enhance the consideration of some crucial aspects linked to the effectiveness, as cultural diversity, the huge social economic disparities I have already mentioned. With this, we want to guarantee the possibility of a greater engagement and establishment of a more horizontal dialogue between the patients, organizations, and the plenary. In such a scenario, the representations of patients and organizations contrast their experience with the scientific evidence, and new elements are brought to the arena that can lead to reversals or to the perception of the need of further clarification. We had some episodes here in Conitec that were very interesting. In fact, the testimony of the patient, okay, we must see, we must reevaluate some aspects of our for first decisions, and also it's very interesting. And well, we also keep publishing the report to society to inform the public consultation. The document consists in a kind of summary of the main findings of the technical report. It contains all the stages of the HTA process, and it's updated as these phases are finished. It also brings an account of the moment of the patient perspective, bringing up an exhibition not only of the testimony, but of its developments in context meeting. The contents brought in a more accessible language, including graphic resource and things like that, in order to facilitate the understanding by the non-specialized public. It has been made a great effort to make it more interactive, so in the future, it can also function as an instrument for dissemination of technical and scientific knowledge in a strict sense. Well, we also try to guarantee the transparency, so the video and minutes of context meetings are made available at our website. And in the near future, we expect to introduce qualitative evidence in the technical report and establish a qualitative method to analyze the contributions of experience and opinion received during the public consultations. We are already investing on it. Our equipe's been trained a lot, so many courses and tools. And well, our purpose with this is to bring aspects related to experience, values, daily life of potential users of the technology. So we think which would allow to glimpse elements related to effectiveness, the impact of quality of life and subjective well-being, as well as to real-world data concerning with the use of the technology. So we have a lot of challenges and so much work to do, but we have a lot of will, and we are very hopeful, you know. So I think we have some years to implement and make it perfect as we want, but we had a lot of effort, and that I can assure you.
Thank you so much. I think it shows something which is important to keep in mind for everybody who does this, but especially in low and middle income countries, is even if you have the will to do the best in this and to establish the best process, it continues to be a learning process. It continues to be something which will evolve when you get experience with it, when you get feedback from the patients, from the citizens on what works and what doesn't work, what is realistic. And also what is relevant to them and meaningful to them. And I think that is really important points. And to make sure that your challenges are not over, there is a challenge put forward also in the chat, which is that although, and it comes from Deborah Alighieri, and she says, although there is all these efforts are there for patient organizations, it's sometimes practically impossible to get the necessary information and documents and so on to be able to give a good input. And I think I just wanted to pull out, I think it's an important observation in many countries who try that, not only in the low and middle income countries, also in the more major healthcare systems. And there was a project, or there is an ongoing project in the patient and citizen involvement group, which has created templates and guidance for creating summary information for patients from dossiers, so that the dossier is summarized by the submitting company in a way that it's readable for patients, that it's understandable for patients. And there was a workshop yesterday on that, or a presentation in a workshop yesterday on that, where the system was presented. The material is also available through the HTAi internet site and can be downloaded from there, just as a remark to this specific comment which came through the chat. Any other comments from the panel?
Yes, I think this idea of the consistent dossier, so I think it's from Sean on the other side as well. I think when the way to correct this in low and middle income countries is to start from the very beginning. When a pharmaceutical company decides to engage in some clinical development of some medicine. So we know the pharmacogenomics now are really pushing us to include a wide group set of genome phenotypes in that clinical research at the outset. Why don't we start from there, ensure there's patient engagement in that early section, setting the question right, designing how the surveys, how the clinical research will take place, participating in all the dissemination, and this same set of individuals that are involved, we can create what is called a standard document, which will flow throughout the research. And we know that the same documents, the standard document that we are looking at, will also be required by the regulators. So the regulators will ask you, how did you involve patients and what was their contribution? And how was this taken part? Where was patient perspective there, patient preferences included that? And the same question will then be repeatedly asked by the HTA body. So why don't we standardize throughout the line, have this patient presence right at very early, and then have these patients following this throughout the way, right down to the regulator level and to the HTA level. So by the time it comes off an HTA evaluation, the patients are already familiar with what's on offer there. They've seen it, they've seen how it was conducted. They can be almost like witness to this and testify in some of the presentations. And that reassures everybody, including the HTA experts and the political parties, that we know this patient engagement was throughout this and it was standardized. And that needs to be looked at afresh. I think post-COVID, that's the one we should really look at. And I'm so glad Mark Bouton from one of IAPA's guys is now heading that patient engagement at Novartis. So it really helps us get that edge in. So he appreciates this approach. Thank you.
Sean, would you like to react?
Sure. I mean, obviously, I guess we don't consider ourselves the other side in the process, because at the end of the day, we're here for patients. So I think Gualdeep's sentiment is definitely shared throughout, for example, at Novartis, where if we can agree on what evidence will be created in our clinical trials, and it's done from the perspective of the patient need and the caregivers, I think this is what we're striving for. So it's really key to have that stakeholder input, even at the setup of our clinical trials. And for me, there's no risk about influencing the decision maker nor the HTA body. That direct, involvement is recommended and encouraged for us. And sometimes, sometimes we do this even at the risk about us not having, I think, evidence that is currently accepted by an HTA, and that's our job to think about how do we get this, these types of impacts on a disease recognized. If it's not a validated tool, I think we're still interested to see how a disease is impacting a patient and a caregiver. And sometimes we get to the end of the process and realize, because it's a newer endpoint or a novel way of collecting this perspective, it's harder to get that included in the HTA. But at the end of the day, I 100% agree with Gualdeep that in a perfect world, we do have upfront alignment on what evidence that will be needed to be considered of most value during the process. And that's not just HTAs, it's regulators. So even having, HTA bodies, regulators, able to talk to, life science, companies as they're collecting their evidence generation plan is so valuable, and that should be information that's kind of binding us. So if we are all aligned on what you need to show the impact of of a therapy on a specific disease, that we get that information up front, we collect it in an objective way, and we present it at the end of the clinical trial process for it to be evaluated. This is kind of the holy grail for us, that we're all aligned on what is the evidence that's needed, what is the meaning of that evidence, and then of course that it's taken into consideration when we're thinking about value at many different levels. So the value to the patient, to the caregiver, to the practitioners in the healthcare system, to the and then finally to society at large. So I think that this is what we're striving for, and I think the more inputs we can get in a coordinated fashion, the better for us to be able to target our evidence generation efforts around the information that matters most for making a decision about to include a technology or not.
Thank you, Sean. Actually, I realize we've already entered into the discussion of the next session, the question. So let me quickly look at this, these responses here. We've talked about some of the examples. There is one on the COVID equity task force aimed at low and middle income countries. Then there is, I'm really bad with abbreviations, IDSI in Ghana and India. I'm not aware of that. So if you want to share more information on that through the chat, that would be interesting for us, I guess. But let me move to our next question, which was, if you had to establish patient and citizen involvement in a low and middle income country, where would you start? And I guess we've heard already from Cavalde. Why don't you start from the beginning of research and do it throughout the whole process? So grow it with producing the evidence. Any other comments on this point?
I think I go back by the survey that was put. The real point is now to go for that political will right at the top, and then progress down, have a legal framework incorporated, because then you step down. I think that's the way to do it. On the political will, as you know, many of the it's very surprising. I always bring this up. The resolution was, I think, 63 point something at the, which was taken at the WHA on having health technology assessment as part and parcel of the universal health coverage assessment. All the member states, African member states, have adopted that resolution. So the political commitment is there at that level, but now to translate it into the national level is where the key task is. And then even within the legal framework, I think on all the treaties that the member states of WHO and World Health Assembly have signed up to, they always have that framework in there, but citizen and patient involvement in whatever health decision-making is taken, it should be incorporated. So those two are the first ones. I think start from there and create that enabling ecosystem, and then everything follows, then money follows it, then capacity building, grants, patients get interested, engaged, and so forth. Throwing money at the problem is not the issue. It's really that political will.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to share your perspective on that?
So I'd approach this as I do many other things. The first thing for me would be to listen and to understand. So I would undertake an exercise in the country just to really understand the issues about access to medicines from the patient citizen perspective. We've done similar small scale where we find usually a university to work with in the member state, or another organisation, or even we've used contract research companies, and just really undertake some focus groups, maybe some research just to really try and understand what are the issues around access to medicines, how the healthcare system is set up in the country, and then also understanding the culture around that, around how the opportunities are for interface, both at government level or policy level, or indeed at a healthcare system. And then you can put in place a plan for what might be the best approach, so it's sort of fairly systematic. And in WHO terms, the policy levers we have obviously are advocacy. So in low and middle income countries, we have a WAR representative. There's usually a national focal point in the Ministry of Health. So use our advocacy channels to really lobby basically for things to change, point out the benefits of doing this, and then also provide concrete examples of where this could happen, starting small, providing dialogue with other countries that have done this, the benefits, and then possibly some direct technical assistance to really help them do this, show them the way, and pulling in experts I've had across with other projects. The HTA community has been great in responding and come and helped and supported with capacity building training. In the Balkan region, we've been looking to set up an HTA network. So that's where I'd start from a WHO perspective.
That's interesting. So we have two different approaches. Kavaldit starts from the top and try to make the link between the political commitment and what is actually happening. And you start from the bottom. I think that's excellent. You will meet hopefully in the middle. But it's also, there is a comment from the audience I see in the chat. From Cyril Gerard before, saying the health system in most of those countries are community-based, so it could be made bottom-up. So that would support Sarah's approach, I guess. But I think without making the link to the politics, it will still be very difficult only doing it bottom up. Although, Khaled, we had a discussion yesterday around that, and you said, why don't we just bypass politics? I also kind of liked that comment yesterday, where you suggested start creating these examples where something happens and then with the results go and influence politics.
Anke, I just wanted to also say, with the community involvement or, bottom up, that to link it to the HTA process or, the evidence-based, the decision-making process, that's also one of the, I think, bottlenecks, right? The linkages may not be working well. And I've seen that in many African countries, there are community-based approaches a lot, but where are the linkages between them and across and in the different levels?
Yeah, that's a very important point, because in the end, the decision making is a more or less fixed process and needs to fit and link up with this process too. Yeah. There was also a question or comment from Deborah Alighieri asking for, do you think the internet access could contribute to amplify like the voice of the patient, or the accessibility or communication between patient and decision-making side? Any thoughts there?
I think the web engagement, I think, has brought decision makers closer to the front. I think that's something we have noticed quite uniquely at the International Alliance of Patients Organization. We find that we are holding an African Patients Congress, and when we used to hold a physical event, it was such a struggle to get some of the policy elites to appear. Now they're all ready to do it because it's just a short time out of the day, maybe 15-minute section. to come and say something to us and hear what we have to say. So I think everybody is reaping that harvest from what COVID has given us, that it has allowed us to access some of these higher echelons. And I think more even discovering that it improves their knowledge in healthcare and other issues. I think it's almost like a live experience degree in practice. Some have come to us to put their experience into practice and take a sounding board. So yes, it does. And I think patients themselves, we find that's something that's happened very closely. We can go out and get access to information and support from others on one-to-one and Zoom. Sadly, I think on the WHO side, I think, Sarah, sorry, it's not a criticism, but WHO recently moved everything that was on HTA away. You can't get back to those papers. So I'm now trying to correct my websites because all that material has moved into a new platform somewhere and disappeared. So please do check out what's going on, because it seems the WHO has bought a new solution and we can't search it. We don't know where those documents have gone. So we have lost a whole raft of technical material. So we need that back, please. Thank you.
Important votes. Clarice, from your Brazilian experience, the internet, does it help you with your efforts?
Well, of course, the internet has been helping us a lot to improve patient and public involvement. But that's, as I mentioned before, we have digital exclusion, legal literacy, lots of problems concerned with that. So we think that internet gives us an important tool, but itself it's not the solution, you know. As Sarah said, community approaches can help us to use the internet and get closer to patients. For example, with the gatekeepers and community health agents, you know. So we think that internet must be a tool, use it with intelligence and always focusing on our patients' needs and our system's needs. And we can take it off and, oh, okay, let's use Microsoft Teams and talk with patients and everything's solved. Not exactly, you know. Well, I think that transparency can be guaranteed with internet. As I mentioned, we put the videos of the Conitex meetings, and lots of patient organizations said, oh, okay, great initiative. And in fact, it's really helped us. So internet can give us a lot of things, but not everything. That's my point of view.
Yeah, I guess it's like a trade-off. You said before in your introduction, it's unfortunate that sometimes we only interact with the patient organizations, but the access to patients is more difficult. The internet might be a solution to some degree there, although you still exclude a lot of people who don't use the internet or who don't chat, like myself. I don't chat a lot in the internet, so I would be hurt then. But I guess using the different channels, maybe we can expand the access to these opinions.
Okay, I just wanted to tell you,
yeah, go ahead.
The 12 minutes, and then there were some questions on the involvement of the pharma industry to help or not.
Well,
and that actually links to your next question.
It does. That's what I thought. It's like, how can all different stakeholders help to foster patient and citizen involvement in low and middle income countries? And I emphasize all different stakeholders. But since we do have the question, I put it to you, Sean, because there were specific questions like what could be the role of a pharmaceutical industry? And obviously some people also saw that there might be a role in funding some of this. I leave the answer to you.
Sure. No, I'm happy to discuss this because I think it is a point of I think some different confusion, right, about the role of industry. Obviously, we're deriving a lot of the evidence, and as I said earlier, maybe it's different company by company, but maybe that emphasis on that early dialogue is one that I think the industry is very interested in hearing about the perspectives of how diseases are impacting various stakeholders within the healthcare system, including the end users, of course, and the patients, probably at the top of the pyramid. For us, I think we're also looking, we're hoping that HTAs is they're burgeoning around the world, which is a great thing because I think it gets us away from a specific cost conversation to the value conversation, and the more holistic that the HTA process can be derived to see whether or not it's going to address the local context is everything for us. So I think when you think about starting from scratch, the last question now, how different stakeholders can help, I think the whole process needs to it needs to be aligned to the health and care systems and ambition for access to care and the capacity for adopting innovation. So for us, I think we would like to actually see, a much more formalized and crystal clear role about how, an HTA or process to get access can be developed, clarified, and be transparent. So for us, we want to really erase the perception, and maybe the industry did have, some participation in this about kind of using patients as kind of, influencers in the decision making in a very non-scientific way, and that's definitely not the case. And I think we're trying to increase. Someone else had mentioned the, I guess the courage that it takes for patients and caregivers to be directly involved in the process. And for sure, I think we want to make sure that we can make this whole process as accessible to as many people as possible. And I think for us, there's also a different, a different level of spectrum in terms of how direct and how indirect, the pharmaceutical industry can be at different stages of the process. And this goes for all stakeholders. So I think it's important to look at all of the different stages in the process, from the early dialogue to the scoping, to the assessment, to the appraisal, the decision, and even the HTA methods themselves. These different stages are going to require, I think, different levels of direct and indirect participation of different stakeholders. So for us, I think obviously there's a lot of importance and validity to having a participative process, to be open and find out what kind of evidence is most needed when. And it's also interesting, as we speak with more and more even outgoing HTA directors around the world about where they feel like they added the most value in terms of improving patient outcomes that matter to patients. And it's interesting, the HTA decision itself is sometimes put down a few different levels in terms of where these individuals feel like they left the biggest legacy. Others, one that comes to the top in most of these interviews comes around evidence-based and updated clinical guidelines as having even a greater impact than the HTA process itself. So for us, we're continually trying to see if we can create consensus guidelines around the world in terms of which interventions matter the most, and most importantly, how these decisions get the most out of the available resources in the country. These are the ones that we're also kind of equally focused on, because this might have the greatest kind of bang for the buck, I think, when it comes to where stakeholders can play a huge role in terms of improving patient outcomes in specific countries. So I just point that out, that I think there's different parts of the process where I think different stakeholders need to be involved. And I think, for us, I think we're very interested in, in taking into account all of the stakeholder input along the way. But in terms of how it plays a role in terms of the access decisions, I think we really want to make sure that we're focused in on, finding the best moment in time to give the most participation in the access process from the right stakeholders as possible. And some of those, you'll need more industry, I think, inputs, and other ones you'll need more societal and patient inputs, depending where you are in that process.
And Cavalde, I would like to hear your
I think, yes, Sean's put it quite correct. Okay, see the logic of from where I'm sitting. I know this innovative health technology is proprietary, meaning the company who's created it knows it best. And if there is a government or an HTA body that's preventing me or a patient talking to you, it's really absurd, that I'm not getting that firsthand information that I should. So that's why I was talking about the legal framework needs to change. That patients should be able to talk to you because that proprietary knowledge has been with you, you've developed it, and therefore you're the experts, the first point of contact. So therefore we must have a dialogue with that. And then from there onwards, I think we then develop that common consensus between both on various aspects of it. And you're right, we're not advocating on emotional needs or price or anything like that. We're actually talking about the benefit and how this fits into our lives, which is important. And to see where things are changed dramatically for us. And that needs to be brought into the focus, I think, in a joint time. And similarly, I think once again, when we go to the regulators, it's the same story there again, that who are you regulating on behalf of? It's us. So therefore, if you're regulating on behalf of us, then we must have the triangle finished off by having you guys there. And then the last point, I think, is that after we have done all this, we have got the patient engagement, clinical trials, we've spoken to you. And as you said, I've joined Envisage, Envision, which is about disseminating papers and medical know-how and all quite clearly out there in layman's language. We then need to come to the HTA bodies, and that then completes the square for us. So we need 4 points in there, not the 3 that we have been looking every time. So the fourth point is the HTA body, and that we do need to make sure these 4 points actually talk together and have a resilient structure within that, that we say things. And it needs to reform. I think it's been very bad practice in the past that one party can't talk to the other one. Really, that's where the interest lies, in joint dialogue and moving things apart. As far as funding is concerned, I think Pharma has done well so far in funding groups on various elements of HTA. It has put monies in some HTA lectures and so forth. But we are now also developing courses in low and middle income countries, which have come to you, everybody again, and Anke and Jenny as well, I was talking about. We tried to develop a course for low and middle income countries, how to engage with this, what are the important elements of it, and where we can improve for the future. And there, I think that funding is there on funding, but in kind sometimes. Send us your experts. For instance, sickle cell, we approached Novartis for that. You had a very good diagnosis for the crisis, medicine for that in sickle cell. And nobody has that except you guys. And that really was important to us, that to have that expert speak to us. So yes, it's a thing that we must speak together and keep that dialogue together. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Sarah, would you like to briefly comment? Our time is slowly going to the end.
Again, I think from my perspective, I've been in recently to a number of healthcare systems and done assessments on the readiness of the procurement and supply chain management systems in countries. So this is before we even get to notions of HTA. They need to put in criteria for selection. The most of these countries have essential medicines list. They've understood that they need to start thinking about clinical effectiveness. There's some of them are progressing on to notions of cost, budget impact, but it tends to be around price. So I think what I'd like to see is stakeholders generally advocating for the involvement of HTA principles and decision-making about healthcare spending. So I think that will be my number one ask. And this also means for industry and sort of that in these countries, the country part of the company, again, they often haven't engaged with HTA previously. There's no HTA mechanism in the country. So I could see a role for companies for doing much more awareness raising about what would a good dossier look like or good submission. The requirements aren't high, but certainly together we can raise the barrier and support the healthcare systems to raise the barrier. And then part of that conversation to start talking about it's good to understand what's actually happening when patients take these medicines as well. So I think before we get to a HTA system, there's some very early things we can do to start improving access to medicines.
Thank you very much. So we have 50 seconds left, and because I really don't like to be shut off just like that without saying goodbye and thank you to everybody, I'll conclude the session now. And I really would like to thank all the panel members. It's a interesting discussion. We need to continue. We really need to continue this discussion to bring this forward and to help consistent processes in low and middle income countries, how they can create sustainable healthcare systems with the inclusion of everybody. So thank you to the audience for the great contributions in the chat and the questions. And I'd love to see you again. Contact us if you are interested in working with Johnny and me. We are around.